because there are a lot of ways of getting this code into your system, and certainly some of them are more malicious than others. I guess when end users install an antivirus endpoint system, they just are kind of used to their system performance taking a nosedive when that kicks off, when those scans kick off. So, what's the difference between that and a CPU miner? But my mind goes to current sanctions, geopolitical situation, cryptocurrency, blockchain, and all that. But that's a talk for a different time. So,
and John, I didn't introduce us either. I just started talking. So if you want to introduce yourself, always something cool too as well.
Good point. Well, my name is Jonathan Rosinski, a senior systems engineer here at Arctic Wolf. I cover enterprise entities here out of New York City. So everything kind of like Southeast Manhattan and all of Long Island is my particular territory. My background prior to Arctic Wolf is primarily enterprise data infrastructure, so storage, networking, security, cloud, compute, those types of things. And Matt, I'll give you the opportunity to speak here.
Sure. Yeah, I just jumped in there and started going down the rabbit hole, but I'm also a pre-sales systems engineer here at Arctic Wolf too. So a little on the smaller business end of it, where it's more of the smaller size businesses and stuff like that where I work, but it is also the New York City area, even though I'm positioned in our headquartered office here in Eden Prairie. Prior to this, I did about 20 years worth of networking, security, systems admin, all kinds of stuff. Now I kind of joke, for the last couple of years, I've transitioned to the dark side here in sales. But prior to this, I did a lot of the stuff that we're talking about. So you might hear me throw in some stories and stuff from my personal experience as well. But thanks for having us today. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks everyone for taking the time to hear us out today. So before we get into any of the individual novel 0 days that that we all saw kind of emerge last year, let's just take a look, for a moment at this timeline and realize that, every month or so, there was another major incident, something in the news, right? I'm myself, I was paying pretty close attention around the time of like Colonial Pipeline, JBS Meats. Those were kind of supply chain attacks that really had a significant impact. Colonial Pipeline's billing system went down. They stopped shipping gas, leading to kind of like a run on gas stations in the southeastern United States for a hot minute there. JBS Meats, one of the largest meat packers in this hemisphere, had to stop their processing activities for some time. That was kind of led to some concerns about a shortage of meat that may have hit the market. So I think that had some short-term price impacts, but ultimately was able to be resolved in a relatively short period of time. But again, you're just taking a step back and starting to realize that generally speaking, within the industry, there's a lot at stake with a 0 day, and there's a lot at stake within everyone's individual environment, within every individual company. Really very few, if any, entities can operate these days without their data and without their back-end infrastructure. So the risk to your business is real, both from an operational perspective and from a reputational perspective. You look at August, that T-Mobile data leak. You look at Robinhood, customer data being exposed, internal emails, communications. These are real risks to all of our businesses today. And so we're going to talk a little bit about some of the vulnerabilities that kind of led to some of these disclosures that were leveraged in some of these cases, and in other cases were just out there and required a response pretty much industry-wide today. And, if there are any questions throughout, feel free to jump in. Really, we're doing this for the benefit of the audience here. We hope that you get something useful out of this. And if you have any thoughts, questions, comments, or concerns, like I said, please don't hesitate to jump right in and, we'll talk through it. Matt, thank you. So, SolarWinds. This was a pretty significant supply chain attack. So SolarWinds is a software provider. They provide software to their end users primarily around network monitoring, asset monitoring. They provide it both as a service and as something that you can deploy and run within your own environment, in your own, within your own devices. This was originally discovered in December of 2021. But in fact, the compromise then was traced back to much earlier in the year, so back in March, about 9 months of dwell time for this compromise. So it looked like after further investigation that it was in fact a Russian government-associated entity, the hacking group Advanced Persistent Threat 29 Cozy Bear, that had compromised the SolarWinds service. And essentially what they were able to do was go in and essentially create a fraudulent signature on an update to that SolarWinds Orion package. And once that update was deployed into customer environments, they had an avenue of ingress into those environments. So this was kind of like the initial ingress, right? The point that they were able to get into these customer networks at the very beginning, right? So you think about 9 months of dwell time and what an attacker could do within your environment over the course of the better part of a year, and it's not trivial, right? So this wasn't something where they got in and then kind of like burned all of their access right away, encrypting data or exfiltrating data right away. In fact, what this was a long simmer, right? So this was a slow burn. They were in there, they were propagating throughout these customer environments for, again, over half a year, 3/4 of a year, in fact. They were attempting to obfuscate their presence, obscure their activity, evade detection, and ultimately were successful in doing so at a really high level. A number of really critical government agencies, 3-letter agencies, Department of Commerce, Department of Energy, these, some of the very highest criticality kind of governmental agencies around, in addition to a large number of prominent private companies, ultimately fell victim to this attack. So, in fact, at the end of the day, it wasn't even programmatic detection that revealed this. It was somebody going and investigating, telltale traces, signatures of some malicious activity within some of these customer environments that ultimately led to kind of the forensic effort to kind of backtrack and figure out, well, where was this stuff coming from in the first place? And ultimately that was again accomplished near the end of the year. But in the meantime, as it turned out, there was a non-trivial amount of data exfiltration damage that was done, and just this was really taking place under people's noses. They weren't aware, right? End users had to go in, ultimately be made aware of this, and then update their SolarWinds deployments. Whereas if you were using the SolarWinds SaaS solution, that was something they would do for you on the back end without your intervention or necessarily awareness, right? In fact, in our customer base, we didn't see a whole lot of indicators of activity here. We did see indicators of compromise in the form of beaconing out from some of our customer networks. But I guess those customers weren't considered to be high enough profile targets by Cozy Bear because they didn't really seem to do anything with that access that they possess. So by just isolating that beaconing activity, we were able to figure out, okay, who do we need to go into, which networks are subject to this vulnerabilities, to this attack vector, and who needs to go in and update their Orion deployment effectively. Any questions on this?
Yeah, it was kind of interesting, right? Very targeted at specific people that they wanted to, or companies, government agencies they wanted to attack. With Arctic Wolf, right, we provide SOC as a service, MDR. It's kind of a couple different nomenclatures it falls under, but the customers that we had maybe didn't have the notoriety of being highly government locked down. And usually I say that because these entities have their own SOC team, or they're their own security company like FireEye and others, where they are monitoring their own networks, etc. I think what's important to note, right, and John hit on it too, tools aren't perfect. I think what we saw here was this took somebody to investigate with human eyes before this was actually found. Whereas, all right, we got millions of different tools, EDR, all kinds of Rs, all kinds of SIMs, everything, all these great tools, but nothing found it. So people that are on this call and others that you're training, this is important, right? Because you're really on the front line and maybe finding this stuff that isn't discovered by other tools that are really supposed to be doing a lot of this as well. So appreciate everybody on the call too, continuing to learn and getting into this field, because we need more people that can do this kind of stuff.
Yeah. Thanks for that, Matt. The reality is, human intelligence is not anything like obsolete in this field. We need more eyes on glass. We need more folks educated, vigilant, knowledgeable. We at Arctic Wolf do take the position that, human intelligence is very much necessary when you're trying to kind of comb through and vet what this activity is. Is it a genuine compromise event, something that requires remediation action immediately, or is it just a false positive? One of the services we intend to provide for our customers. There are no other questions? All right, great. All right, so another vulnerability that we saw take place last year. So this was another 0-day. This one impacting Microsoft Exchange. So there was an out-of-band patch actually that was released on Tuesday. So outside of the typical, this was Patch Tuesday, but this was outside of the typical Exchange patching cadence, I suppose. And so ultimately, there were a number of Exchange vulnerabilities that were that this patch sought to resolve, and ultimately these were being leveraged by Hafnium. So this is another one of these advanced persistent, quasi-nation state or nation state associated threat actors that are kind of out there constantly scanning the public internet, constantly crawling the dark web, looking for compromised credentials, constantly probing and performing reconnaissance and looking for a way into your network in addition to ours and everybody else's. And they had been exploiting this vulnerability in these publicly accessible Exchange servers. So once they get into Exchange, right, they can get in, they can access, again, company confidential data, company confidential communications, real reputational risk to your business, end user PII, sensitive data. This is stuff that's, the risk is real, and the last thing you want is to leave an Exchange server unpatched, which it's worth noting, we are still seeing Exchange servers in the wild that have not been patched up to this level. So, we'll have a takeaways kind of slide near the end here, but, if I can give you a spoiler on that, I would say patch your systems and do it in a timely fashion, because one thing that threat actors love is a forgotten or lost or unpatched asset. Part of the reason we say, in order to really harden your security posture, you first need to assess it. You need to take a full inventory of your assets and the associated vulnerabilities, right? If you've got an Exchange server out there, maybe you forgot about it, maybe you migrated to O365, maybe you went to G Suite or something else, or for whatever reason, it's been maybe soft decommissioned, but it's still online, anything of that nature. It could still be exploited by an attacker through this means. And that goes for any type of IT resource, right? Any computer provides, for a third party to go in and be able to take over because of an unpatched vulnerability such as this, provides an attacker with a really tempting target, because even, an outdated computer is still Turing complete. You can still do some mischief from there.
For sure. And I think Microsoft probably loved this, because we saw a lot of adoption now to Office 365, right? People that were thinking about it really decided, yeah, it's just time, or I'm just going to do it now because of what happened, which, as we get towards the end here too, you'll see when you get to those SaaS applications, like John said, it does kind of take some of this patching or some of this worry off you and put it on the vendor that's supplying the SaaS app, which then does, make your life a little bit easier as well. But a lot more Office 365 accounts got created after this.
So Kaseya, this was another kind of supply chain attack, right? Similar in some way to that kind of SolarWinds attack, in that Kaseya was providing services to, in this case, managed services providers, among others, who in turn were providing services to other customers, right? So you may not have been doing business with Kaseya as a first party, but you may have been through a services provider that you were signed up with and consuming a service from. right? And so in this case, you have this Kaseya Virtual Systems Administrator package that the attackers were able to gain access to through this vulnerability. So they gain access to this VSA package. They upload this malicious payload, which then downstream from the Kaseya service provider propagates to these MSPs, and then these MSP end user customer consumers, then they in turn are affected and their environments are compromised and they are open to exploitation, exfiltration, encryption, and just all the bad things that you don't want to have happen on a Friday night. So ultimately, again, right, this is an abuse of kind of that trust relationship, right? So there was kind of a transitive trust relationship in place, right? The MSPs were trusting Kaseya and the end users were trusting the MSPs in turn. This is hard to defeat because at the end of the day, we're all trusting somebody. We're all using smartphones and laptops. We're all trusting Apple or Android, Google or Samsung. We're trusting somebody with providing us with signed, in packages. We're trusting the integrity of those packages. So it is hard to protect against this kind of an attack as the end user. This again is why to our mind and to my mind, the best way to solve for something like this, it's not by saying, hey, we're going to never be subject to this type of an attack, because you really can't control that. It's to have the right kind of monitoring in place, have the right kind of solutions in place, have the right kind of asset and vulnerability inventory accomplished, be training your people, be aware, be vigilant, and ultimately to have that layer of human intelligence combing through all of the alerts that an intelligent system may produce, such that ultimately that when you have a true positive, oh geez, somebody intruding into your network, leveraging this or any vulnerability will typically leave telltale signs. And ultimately, that's how this was found.
Yeah, and that that 0-day aspect of the initial breach into Kaseya is a little questionable. I think that's what Kaseya claims. There's some other comments that this could be traced back to earlier vulnerabilities that were actually notified to them of months or even weeks to years, depending on which one you're looking at. But they claimed it was a 0-day, I believe, that got some people in and some other factors that allowed it. But questionable, I guess I'll call it, depending on how they fixed some of those vulnerabilities and if they were actually fixed completely.
That's a good point. I don't know that we have a true root cause analysis for how the initial compromise of Kaseya was performed, that then was leveraged to deploy this malicious code through VSA into the MSPs and into the customer environments. So to your point, Matt, maybe the definition of 0-day, maybe it's questionable with regard to that, but ultimately, a lot of customers were impacted by this, and this one was not really a slow burn like we saw with SolarWinds. This one was more of a smash and grab. So once that access was obtained by the threat actors, you saw things happening like data being encrypted, data being exfiltrated, stolen, really malicious activities, all typically with the goal of, hey, pay us and we'll give you the encryption keys, let you go and continue business operations, or we will not embarrass you by leaking your proprietary information to the public internet.
For sure, for sure. Cool. I'll grab a few of these slides too and talk through some of them. This is where we get to Log4j, right? And I'm sure everybody on this call has probably heard it, at least reference, or if you didn't have to deal with it directly, but it is a component of some Java-based logging. Well, it's a Java-based logging utility, right? Written by a person whose name I'm not going to try to pronounce because I'll do it horribly. So you guys can read, you can determine that yourself. But otherwise, it's mainly a part of the Apache logging services, and they have it as part of some of the things that they deploy in their software. It's one of several Java logging frameworks. Ultimately, right, what it does is records events, errors, routine operations, communications, diagnostic messages. And I think here's the one that kind of hits home with this one: system administrators and users. As we'll see, it really leverages LDAP to connect to an OpenL or an LDAP server elsewhere to pull down information, which is the crux of the problem here. The only thing is it's not limited to just additional user information. You can really kind of run almost anything at that point to an extent. And the other component here is just like if everybody's ever dealt with Java before or something that goes wrong in it, it's embedded in a lot of different stuff, depending on what you're working with, whether it's websites, right? So there's Apache. If you're running a website, what do most people use to run their websites? Apache. As part of that, they probably have some Java stuff embedded in it, which is really where this becomes such a huge deal and why it's so widespread across the industry, across the internet, and all that good stuff. This is open source software. Another thing that could be debated too about how that's secured and things like that with the community looking over those things. But ultimately, that's why this was so widespread and ultimately why this is such a big deal. Now,
Yeah.
oh, go
One
ahead.
thing I just to add there, Matt, is just, when we say this was widespread, I mean it was everywhere. If your kids are playing Minecraft, that application was found to be vulnerable. Steam was vulnerable. iCloud, I think, was vulnerable. More or less just about everything on the internet at some level, whether public facing or internal systems, there was some vulnerability to this exploit just about everywhere. And that just speaks to the ubiquity of the Log4j library or Log4j library. I don't know how it's pronounced. Um, but yeah, to Matt's point, right, that open source supply chain, just because something is peer reviewed doesn't mean it's always, entirely free of flaws. Maybe there's a larger conversation there about software development lifecycle and how we incorporate security and open source. And again, outside the scope of this conversation, perhaps, but worth being aware of.
Not that commercial software is necessarily more secure, right, Jonathan? So,
Right.
right, like I said, always a conversation that's interesting when it comes to all of this, all of the things we end up using from kind of an IT landscape, software, hardware, etc. Um, and also kind of jumping into what then was exploited as part of this, or actually the exploits themselves, was on December 9th. So we'll start with some dates. We'll start walking through this. We had there were some security researchers had a proof of concept exploit code that they used to exploit this particular feature in some of these Java embedded Java applications, and it's CV 2021 44228. As you can see, I put two of them on here. It eventually spiraled into a second one that was found afterwards. The first one really not good. I always like to look at the base scores, right? That 10 is really telling. That 10 is out. And when I explain this, the CVSS scoring to people that Jonathan and I end up talking to, I always call it, well, 0 is informational and 10 is, oh crap, it's easy to exploit. And when you do, you get full system access, which we certainly saw how easy this was to exploit. And if you knew what you're doing, you could pretty much get full system access, or at least start running commands and things that are accessing the system, which is why this was a 10. And then they started to patch it and fix this or get a handle on it, and as they did that, or it was being fixed, they're starting to we there came up with another vulnerability as well as part of this. Not quite a 10, but really close. It's a 9. I think it might have been a little bit over 9, to be honest, but also not good. This is bad stuff, right? This is at the top of that list where these things need to be patched right away. And as I said, exploitation was as simple as sending a web command to a vulnerable system. Jonathan was also talking about using Minecraft to do this. Well, you could spin up some things and easily compromise systems with very little infrastructure or knowledge to even do this, or at least know if they're vulnerable and start sending them some commands. So this was pretty ridiculous as far as the ease of exploit and how much access obviously you've got as part of it. But that's what made this so dangerous and deadly as well.
Yeah, I mean, it was more or less, once this was disclosed, it was more or less trivial for any third party to send just a crafted string that would redirect through a JNDI lookup, I believe. The log4shell or log4j library would pick up this string, would perform that lookup, and at that point, that lookup could be targeting an arbitrary remote resource on the internet. Yeah, exactly. And that could be malicious code, right? At that point, you're rooted. So.
Yeah, exactly. And Jonathan started talking about it, right? We saw how easy this was. It's attacker just spins up a vulnerable server or goes after a vulnerable server, spins up their own basically LDAP server. So as long as you have that accessible from this vulnerable server, all you do is send some queries over, have it, check out your LDAP server and then pick up some remote commands or whatever you want, right? I found this particular map on the internet that was kind of interesting. So it kind of shows that data flow where the attacker can query that vulnerable server, see if it's actually susceptible to this or not. If it is, it will query back or attempt to reach out to that malicious LDAP server that's spun up, and then it can download some of that malicious code or other information. Now, what I kind of liked about this slide, and it's from GovCertCH, was that it showed where you could actually implement some protection mechanisms at each step of this. So I didn't see this a whole lot of other places, but I liked how it showed where you could actually stop this, and I'll call it the kill chain with, all right, right up front, if you guys have a WAF or a web application firewall in place, fantastic. You might be able to see this stuff and block it right away with that WAF, right? Stopping it dead. Some other places to stop it in the kill chain, right, would have been looking for some additional strings that are being passed. And if you have some way to sanitize that or look into those could help in kind of these other components, and or disable log4j. Obviously, that's going to stop it. But I think if you're also able to look at some of those other filters or be able to evaluate what comes in from commands with other tools, that could help here if you're looking for those things. And then obviously here, disable JNDI lookups, patch log4j, disable log4j. I think those are pretty straightforward. And also disabling remote code bases would be another way to help maybe augment or stop this from happening. So there was a few interesting things on here to make sure this, maybe you could stop it. I like the WAF idea. I just like things that obviously are up front, disable stuff near the perimeter as far as you can based on what you're using. And really there are some ways to do this. So you not only would you, of course, want to disable this or get it off the internet, patch it, all those things you'd expect, but there are some additional tools and ways to kind of filter out maybe what goes into these servers and make sure it gets blocked. And even on the backside, even if you can sanitize some of the input somehow with some additional tools or even some of your own codes, it's possible to do that.
Yeah, I think that points to a kind of it speaks to a broader point there as well, Matt. You know, you think about how any of these types of attacks are perpetrated, right? How any network is infiltrated, how any data is exfiltrated, how anything gets encrypted. It's always a sequence of events, right? There's initial ingress, there's propagation, preceding all of that is reconnaissance. All of this kind of stuff is pretty well documented. And at each one of those steps, there are ways to kind of stop the attack before it happens. You need to have that level of visibility if you want to do that in real time. And you need to have that level of awareness if you want to do it ahead of time. Again, asset inventory, vulnerability inventory, eyes on glass, making sure that you're watching for those telltale signs.
Yeah, or just monitoring, right? You're looking for this stuff. Maybe you can't stop it in its tracks as it occurs, but you at least get logs or something else that indicates something is happening that you need to investigate, because not everything is going to be bad. But if you have the right bells and whistles and tripwires set up, you will have these attackers hit some of those, and then you can dig in as a security professional to see what's going on as well, just to validate, hey, is this on the up and up or is it not? And does this tie into a bigger event that may be occurring? Which also, I'll dive into this, right? This is the log4 shell. I jumped ahead a slide. Jonathan brought up the timeline or kind of the procedure of how that happens. So I jumped over this one, but I want to get back to it real quick. Right, this is about abusing a feature in log4j that allows users to specify custom code for formatting log messages. I think we just kind of talked about this, so I probably don't need to spend a whole lot of time on it. But really, the goal of this was for Java to get additional information about users that may be connected and other things to some of these applications, and just get additional information from an LDAP server. Turns out it can be used for more than just looking up user information and descriptions and other things. And that was really what allows it to be exploited from a malicious activity, for nefarious activities, and also used to just take control and get into servers, or anything actually that has it on. It doesn't have to be a server itself, getting into systems. This is some other stuff I found interesting that's just more statistic based than anything, as this was being followed and observed. And one thing that's kind of interesting or horrible is actually Tenable thought this was probably riskier than 99.5% of all known vulnerabilities out there. I think that is rather telling, that Tenable is, after looking at all these patches, all these vulnerabilities, is saying, hey, guess what? This is in the point, 0.5% of all the worst vulnerabilities that we can come across. So that just says something, at least in the last decade. It's been pretty bad. And then some other teams that were scanning what was going on from a vulnerability and malware perspective, right? We're seeing a lot of exploitations, or at least people attempting to find systems that were potentially vulnerable. On that first day, so actually this started on, I believe, 12/9. Within 2 days, there was at least 46 exploitations, and you can just see how much this escalates. The next day, 169. The next day, 766. Another day, 2,679, 12,000, 28. And they probably didn't see all of the exploitations. This was just a sample of a lot of customers or data they collected. But it just goes to show how much this escalated, and I'm sure it cranked up to easily 100,000 the next day and 400 probably after that. And that's the same, a lot of what we saw as well going through is this just cranked up real quick, and people really took advantage of these 0 days to get access to these servers. Now, some additional details that we pulled from our SOC, right? So this is some things that we actually saw ourselves. What we saw initially, and actually Jonathan talked about this, what we typically see with 0 days and a lot of other initial 0 days is the crypto miner people get in there first. They're as quick as it's out there, they're in there, with crypto mining software, et cetera, using it to gather money in that way. So what we saw was XM Rig, crypto miner malware campaigns came out right away. And they're still using it whenever they can find one of these open servers. They're still actually exploiting this to this day. And then we start to see kind of this level up of more and more sophisticated, or as like John said too, kind of the low and slower, really get in there and use it for other purposes, ransomware, data exfil, stuff like that. So we started seeing more targeted attacks for Trojan backdoors, Cobalt Strike, Meterpreter, PowerShell, and reverse shells back so they could gain access to systems. It was really about now just getting in there and determining what this company or business or machine was, so then it could be used for whatever nefarious purposes they wanted, whether it was going to be data exfil, whether it was going to be ransomware, whether it was just going to be other, whatever else they're trying to get money for or get information from, is really where we start to see that. And then it didn't really stop there. Even in January, as I'll say this trickle down effect from the straight up Java application into these other applications became more known. We found out that VMware Horizon servers were really getting attacked on our side. We saw that quite a bit from our SOC team. And so we actually put out a notification and some other things, but we saw Night Sky ransomware really hitting hard on some of these VMware Horizon servers that were available to the internet to get in there and make some additional money. So you start to see more and more of these targeted attacks as these things go on. And then all of a sudden, Mirai botnet campaigns join in as well and start using some of this stuff for their botnets and other nefarious purposes. So this was sort of the escalation of what we saw going on. Obviously, there's all kinds of things happening in between here, but this was what we observed overall as kind of what was going on when this first got released, all the way through till January.
Again, I just highlight here, the diversity of ways in which this log4shell kind of initial ingress vulnerability is being exploited, right? Early on crypto miners, then you're looking for, they start looking to be able to do account takeover and propagation, actually getting into the point where they're going in and encrypting data in place or exfiltrating data, the threat of disclosure, and finally just taking over systems, from just entirely, and using those to join, a botnet, which in turn would be used for further nefarious actions.
Yeah, for sure. And right, the next thing was, getting rid of it and figuring out what to do, or making sure you've got it. What we saw was this wasn't always that easy to determine if it was in your environment, and more importantly, if it was it a vulnerable version? Not that you shouldn't update no matter what to probably the newest versions, but obviously if you had a vulnerable version, you wanted to make sure you found it and got rid of it ASAP, or patched it or blocked it from the internet, all that good stuff. And one thing that came across here was that vulnerability scanners maybe could detect it in some cases, right, where it was actually reporting back or replied to request for an LDAP lookup, stuff like that. However, this is also embedded in a lot of other software and other things. So maybe there's a vulnerable version, but the service or port wasn't open to allow access at the moment. Not to say it wouldn't be, but what you do want to do in all these scenarios is get rid of or update the software if it has a vulnerability, whether it's in use or not, because it might still end up getting put into use at a later date. It gets turned on. Maybe it was, something else is happening at the time and that port protocol wasn't available to a port scanner. What we found is vulnerability scanners did detect this a bit, but they didn't find all of it. And we wanted to make sure all of this stuff got found, whether it was deeply embedded in a program or not. And actually, at the bottom of this, right, we have a script that Arctic Wolf created to find this. A few different companies made scripts. We did as well. We wanted to make sure that all of our customers were secure. It found the vulnerable versions, no matter how deeply embedded in other software or applications it was, and that then the customers that we have knew about it and could get it fixed. This is still ongoing. We still are seeing some vendors patching and coming along and fixing this in their software. So I don't know it's completely shored up yet. I think the worst is probably over and that most people have patched this, or companies, but it does seem like there's a few new ones popping out here and there where this is still being discovered and patched inside some of these other software applications that have used this particular piece of software. So the script, I'll just run through this real quick. Ultimately, this is a deep dive script, right, that allows us to go in and find these vulnerabilities on a system. So we created this to augment. We're not going to say get rid of network-based scanners or even host-based scans, but they didn't really always find this. They were mainly looking for services, ports, protocols open that had this available that would, you can get the LDAP reply, but they were also maybe looking for a software that the vendor knows that there's a vulnerable version of Log4j in it that it'd be looking for. But until all the vendors come out and let us know that, and there's NVTs or plugins for those tests, we still want to use this script to determine if there is some sort of Log4j vulnerable version on a system. So we created this to augment those network scanners and provide some additional information or scanning capabilities, because not all of these things were being found by these NVTs. So our scan goes deeper. It looks quite a bit deeper into files, applications, and things like that to look for these vulnerabilities. We actually did create a couple of these. We created one right off the bat when that first vulnerability came out. And then shortly thereafter, after the second vulnerability, went back to work and redid it so it would find some of these newer ones as well. It's just basically a deep cold scan that you can run on anything. So you don't need to even have anything connected to a network to run this. It's just a little script you run on the machine and it'll detect it. So if you guys are still looking for some of these scanners, or you haven't done this with some of your machines that you think may hold some of these applications, these vulnerable applications, definitely take this script and use it to scan your systems just to make sure there's nothing missing, or you didn't miss something along the way there and it's deep buried inside a different application and it needs to be addressed.
Yeah, and if you just Google for, Arctic Wolf Log4j script, you'll find the blog posts, you'll find the GitHub repository. This is all public and freely accessible. The main thing I would emphasize here is just, if you're looking for indicators of compromise through network activity, you may miss it if it hasn't been exploited yet, right? So it makes sense in some cases. In fact, I've had customers tell me that when they ran our script, which is actually going at the host level, crawling through the file system, looking for versions of the library that are vulnerable to exploitation, telling me that, in fact, the script found instances of Log4j in their environment that they had not been made aware of through the use of other tools. So, this is free to you and, courtesy of Arctic Wolf.
Definitely. Utilize it as you guys see fit. No charge, just go grab it and run it. I'll let John run with this slide since I've been talking a long time. Take it away, John.
Thanks for that, Matt. Yep. So what you see here, and I'll run through this pretty quickly, but this is kind of the timeline of our response to Log4j. So initial disclosure on Thursday, December 9th, 2021. This was when the vulnerability was publicly disclosed, right? So that's when the CV was kind of first the public was broadly made aware of the existence of this, right? By the next day, we saw a number of campaigns emerging to actually go ahead and exploit it, right? To get in compromised environments, ingress Trojans, and start planting backdoors and start doing some of these nefarious things, not only for immediate gain, but for, further exploitation down the road. So by that next day, we had deployed a number of detections to look for indicators of compromise or attempts to exploit this vulnerability. We notified our customers, hey, we're looking into this. We've got this, right? So by the end of day on Friday, December 10th, so the day after public disclosure of this, we had in fact completed first pass investigations on all of our customers and proactively reached out to all of our customers, not only, as the slide indicates, those who were subject to exploitation or vulnerable to it, but just all of our customers actually got a phone call from Arctic Wolf to let them know, kind of to brief them on their vulnerability posture with regard to this, right? Did we see any indicators of compromise, any vulnerability in your environment or not? So over the weekend, right, we were able to, with our detections in place, we were able to kind of start building this analysis tool, right? So the obvious answer or the obvious question from customers was, well, am I vulnerable to this, right? And so while we were looking for indicators of compromise or malicious activity, we really didn't have a mechanism to say, hey, okay, this is where you have the vulnerable library running within your environment, short of, okay, go in and look manually. So over the weekend, we developed the tool that Matt and I just discussed, right? So this tool that's now available to you free of charge that we did eventually open source, and that Log4Shell deep scanning tool was then released to our customers on Monday, December 13th. Right. So that day we released this to our customers, allow them to go through, start scanning their environments and looking for instances of this vulnerability. Actually, I'm sorry, that was released on Tuesday by noon, but we were in fact deploying and testing it within select customer environments the day before on Monday. So, again, in this case, on December 14th, we saw another vulnerability added to this. So CVE 2021-45046. So this was a denial of service capability associated with this vulnerability. And then ultimately on Friday, that was executed to remote code or escalated to a remote code execution vulnerability. And that kind of, going from denial of service to remote code execution takes that vulnerability score from a 3.7 to a 9.0. So again, 9.0 being a very serious threat of compromise where somebody can get in, escalate their permissions, and actually do some real damage within your environment. So that same day on Friday, we released the version 2.0 of our scanning utility, which was inclusive of these newly emerged CVEs, these newly emerged vulnerabilities that were broadly disclosed that week. So that, and finally that same day, not only did we release the updated version that was inclusive of those vulnerabilities, but that was when we open sourced the tool, right? 8 days after initial disclosure, just over a week, and we have this tool now that searches through all of your host file systems and tells you exactly what where you have vulnerabilities and hence what you need to do, what steps you need to take to actually resolve those vulnerabilities, i.e. patch your systems, patch Log4Shell, rather your Log4j libraries. And that was released, to GitHub and publicly open sourced and made available all again on December 17th. So going forward, we continue to monitor this, right, as we do with all novel 0 days and a variety of threat vectors and groups every day. So we're going to continue to monitor. We're going to continue to refine our detections based on indicators of compromise that we see in the wild, we see in our customer environments based on threat intelligence that we gather both from government and public intel threat feeds, our own proprietary threat hunting, subscription threat feeds. We continue to monitor and protect our customers on an ongoing basis, inclusive of all of this information, right? And at the same time, kind of doing a solid for the entire world by making this tool available so you can go in and, ascertain your own vulnerability posture to this particular exploit.
For sure. For sure. Yeah, I think one thing you'll hear us touch on in a slide or two here is speed matters. So as we go forward, right, or as you are looking to patch or work against or for limiting access to the internet, some of the stuff, speed is of the essence, especially with how quickly malicious actors and APTs and those kinds of people are really leveraging this stuff to get into systems as just so fast, right? So we'll talk about that in a minute, but the other things to note, right, to fix this or remediate in the meantime, were to limit or deny access to the internet for vulnerable or potential vulnerable systems, right? I think that was the first thing we said to anybody that may have had it. If you think you've got it, just get it off the internet if at all possible. It's just your safest bet while we sort through this. I mean, that's when the exploit code was released and we started seeing exploits out in the wild. And then after that, right, update systems with new software patches. Pretty straightforward. That really is what has to be done with any of these types of malware or other system vulnerabilities. Is usually you just got to patch it, and eventually hopefully there's a version that comes out that's patched. In the meantime, right, filter that kind of communication, limit its access. That kind of stuff is always best practice. And one thing we still see is it is still kind of ongoing. We're still seeing vendors that are patching their products that we're one couple months through almost 3 months now into this, and we still do see some things coming out that are vulnerable. So keep patching as you go forward. Attackers are still attempting to exploit this. Keep scanning with vulnerability scanners. I mean, this is typically your security best practices. One thing I like to talk about is newly spun up machines, gold images, master images. What I have seen and had in my past is in these scenarios where it's a rush to patch things are patched as they're in production or testing, but nobody goes back to patch the gold or master image that they came from. So when they go to spin up another server, ta-da, you've got this vulnerability that you thought you had patched and is now back up there. So one thing I always stress is to do that. When I worked for a previous company, I had somebody who spun up some test boxes that he never patched, and they were extremely outdated. He did it, unfortunately, during one of our internal pen tests, so that was not good. And hopefully, luckily that for us was a pen test and not a real malicious actor accessing some of these test machines. But just keep an eye on that. Gold machines, master images, make sure they get patched as well, just to make sure that's not something that comes to bite you later on.
Yeah, and one thing I would interject there, Matt, is I think it speaks to a broader point. You think about, what these threat vectors really are. What are the attackers seeking to do, and kind of how do you remediate? There's a lot of talk about things like ransomware, encryption of data. You absolutely need to be backing up your data to be able to restore in the case of encryption, right? Now, that being said, if if something happens to your data protection infrastructure, you may not be possible to restore. If you're restoring data without checking the integrity of it, you don't know that you're not just restoring another compromised host, right? So to say nothing of the threat of data exfiltration, botnets, crypto miners, data disclosure, there are a variety of other kind of threat vectors in play, right? And so it's important to be looking at your security posture holistically and thinking about kind of all of the potential contingencies that may play out.
Yep, CIA, confidentiality, integrity, availability, right? I think that's what we always stress for too in security, and something to always keep in mind to make sure that as you go through these types of exercises and such, that you're keeping those in mind with all of your policies, procedures, and the way that the business is operating. Some takeaways. All right, we've kind of talked about this whole, I think, presentation. This is kind of just bringing it full circle, and then we'll let you guys move on to it the rest of your day here in a bit. But ultimately, stay vigilant, stay informed. Like, knowing is half the battle, right? So just a GI Joe thing there. But every time I ever move to new jobs or have always subscribed to things to keep me informed, CISA, CERT, SANS, Krebs. And every time I move jobs, I always try to sign up for all of the vendors in that particular company, right? Okay, I'm using Cisco, IBM, HP, this, and whatever other software. Get down those email lists, especially the security ones, so you can keep up to date of these type of things. This one was huge. You probably heard about it even if you were 6 feet under at this point, because it was everywhere. But not all of these vulnerabilities get this much notoriety, and it could be tied to a certain vendor. And you always want to be up to date. So I always say, just stay vigilant, stay informed, always keep your ears to the ground, know what's going on with all of your systems, and also have a plan to do some of this stuff 24/7 incident response, right? Having somebody monitor or at least be looking at data, hopefully on some sort of round the clock scenario, however that's structured. I don't know. For each company, it's going to be different. Obviously, Arctic Wolf can help with that and help provide resources that would be doing that. But otherwise, make sure you've got formalized backup by business continuity, et cetera. All this is part of it. And then, like I said before, speed matters. I always like to kind of hit on this because if you've got a plan and you're ready to go, you can do it much quicker than kind of a chicken with its head cut off running around. So keep your composure, but try to get this stuff done as quickly as possible because you've got the other side of that clock is working against you with malicious actors, then trying to exploit this stuff very quickly as well. And then always be assessing and verifying, right? Or at least as often as possible, patching vulnerabilities, hardening your security posture, knowing what's in your environment. Jonathan talked about having like an asset inventory, hardware, software that can really help speed up some of this stuff. I think most people at this point usually have something in place like that, but if it's not very accurate, that's never a good thing, right? So always kind of be assessing how that goes. And then evaluate your on-prem versus SaaS apps, right? So smaller teams seem to do a little better with SaaS apps rather than having to run that stuff themselves, just because those SaaS apps run themselves more or less. And you're just in charge of the configuration less so than having to make sure they're updated. If there's issues with them, you have to fix it, all that good stuff. However, as you implement SaaS applications, make sure it's done securely right out of the gate, right? Because even a good SaaS app, if it's not configured securely, could be a security hole and allow people to access things that they shouldn't. And then really limit or deny internet access to important systems. I think that's a kind of a no-brainer too, right? If you've got something that doesn't need internet access at all times, either limit what it can access or maybe cut it off. I've worked for many companies where we cut off internet access to a bunch of systems unless it needed them, or they were highly filtered to not allow access to anything but a couple sites. So something to think about if you can, and make sure that if possible, limit access to these systems. And same with things internally where you segment pieces of the network internally. Use firewalls, switches, even access lists. Simple things like that can even make a big difference, even just sort of doing some simplistic access lists on switches. Firewalls are by all means much better, but anytime access you can limit between devices, or network segments is even better. VLANs, air gap things, guest networks from regular networks, special or sensitive networks from internal standard user networks, all that good stuff. If you can do it, definitely do it. And then something John talked about at the very beginning, reset your watch. It seems to be occurring about once a month, every couple months. I think we've seen this lately, so we'll see what the next one is. Hopefully it's not as bad as this, but they seem to be increasing in intensity and kind of the badness of it is what I'll basically call it, right? It's getting that much worse every time this happens. So we'll see how that goes, but hopefully they're not as bad.
Yeah, and given kind of what we're seeing geopolitically, I wouldn't think that there's any reason to believe that these types of things will become any less frequent. Especially with some of the sanctions that were recently announced, it's a factor, right? We all know that kind of this is sort of the first line of conflict, simmering under the surface that's kind of ongoing. Intelligence agencies stockpile 0 days to be able to do things when the time comes. So worth being aware of. And the only other thing I would kind of add here is just you think about IaaS as well, infrastructure as a service, things like Amazon, EC2, Azure, Compute, and so forth. You think about the shared responsibility model. Ultimately, it does fall to the consumer, the end user, to ensure that things like identity and authentication management systems are configured appropriately, user accounts and access levels are configured appropriately. The cloud provider, maintains responsibility for ensuring the security of their physical security of their assets and so forth. But that it is a shared responsibility model, so you got to make sure that you're doing your part to ensure that those things are always secure. And if all of this sounds like a lot, that's only because it is. A lot of organizations are struggling with this, and if you're wearing a lot of hats, you don't have 24/7, 365 to dedicate to it. you're not alone. This is why Arctic Wolf is growing very quickly. We're more than happy to have a conversation.
Definitely. We appreciate you guys sticking with us that whole time. If anybody tabulated any response to this question, certainly let us know. But otherwise, any questions, throw them out there, or we can give you back your evening or move on to the next presenter as well.
Thanks, guys. I think we have time for a little bit of Q&A. If anybody wants to raise something, just unmute. I know this group pretty well. I know somebody's going to have a question.
We welcome it.
Wow. Prove me wrong.
Did everybody sign up for the Roomba? I think that's also important there. So nobody likes to vacuum. Come on.
Oh. Mr. Greg Scott, if you're speaking, I don't see you on audio. We don't hear you.
Oh, I didn't say anything. I just unmuted myself. I didn't say. You can hear me now, right? When I'm actually talking.
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, that's good. No, I just mostly. You brought up so much good stuff. I just better not. I'm going to steal my own thunder, so I'm not going to say anything yet.
Perfect.
But don't leave. What I have to say is way compliment. You're going to like it. It's complimentary to what you guys said. You're going to like it.
Cool.
All right. I guess if there's no questions, we'll shift gears and turn over. So thank you very much, Matthew, Jonathan. Really appreciate it. Very engaging, very thought-provoking, and looking forward to seeing some follow-ups. So hopefully you can join us again in the near future to give us a quick update on what's going on with Arctic Wolf.
Yeah.
Thanks,
Right
sir.
in my neighborhood. Yeah, keep me in the loop too.
Yeah, definitely.
All right, guys. All right, so Greg, just turn it over to you.
Okay,
And,
thanks.
Start your share and
Yeah, before I
take it
share a
away.
screen, you guys mentioned intelligence agencies stock 0 days, and you're dead bang right on. That's just so true. Did you read? There's an article. I can't remember where it came from. There was a lady in Saudi Arabia. She went to jail for 3 years because she was a threat to national security because she wanted women to learn how to drive. So that's a threat to national security in Saudi Arabia. Well, how did the Saudi Arabians find out what was inside her phone about all of her messages? An Israeli company called the NSO Group exploited an Apple iPhone vulnerability. That's how they got inside all those phones. Apple found out about it because the NSO Group made a mistake and left some tracks inside the phone. She sent the phone to a group in Canada named, I can't remember the name. I wrote it down somewhere. The Canadians found it. The Canadians found the footprints. Apple fixed the bug, and Apple is now suing NSO Group. So not only do they stockpile 0 days, but they buy 0 days and they buy exploits from anyone who wants to sell. So we think it's spy versus spy out there, but we are all on the front lines. I could go on that forever, but I won't, because I won't do what I came here to plan to do. Okay. All right. Share the screen. I'm going to do a little bit different on the presentation too than what I first planned. I was going to, instead of an official slideshow, we'll just do it like this. You guys can all see my PowerPoint? Say yes.
Yes.
Yep.
Okay,
Yep.
good.
Yes.
I'm the guy who works for Red Hat, and I'm using PowerPoint. I live in both worlds. I work for Red Hat, so I work for the biggest open source company in the world, and I have an Exchange server in my basement. And yes, I was a victim of that Exchange vulnerability too. I'll have some things to say about that in a minute. But I'm also a credit card victim. I've been in the IT industry since dirt was young. And back in 2011, I was a reseller. I was an independent reseller struggling to earn a living. And I went to buy a bunch of equipment for a customer, and my credit card was denied. And I called US Bank, and it turned out that somebody in Florida had tried to charge like $14,000 worth of crap on my credit card, like some kind of health nut stuff. I don't remember what. I have it all written down somewhere, but I don't have it in my head. It's not important anyway. Kim and I spent an hour. We chased down every single fraudulent transaction. we had transaction IDs and names and dates and places. And we even talked to the store clerk in Florida who waited on some of the attempted thieves. I packaged all that stuff and I sent it off to the FBI. We traded a couple of emails, and I'm still, to this day, I'm still waiting on a callback from the FBI. And it's 2022. The incident happened in November of 2011. So I'm really, really, really glad I didn't hold my breath. So lesson learned from that is law enforcement isn't going to help you if unless you're a major political party or maybe you're a member of the government, or maybe you're Equifax. If you are a victim of one of these things, you're on your own. And I have some more to say about that too. So I've been in the security world since 2000, when I first started building firewalls. I'm the only person I know that made a living building custom firewalls, and I spent almost 20 years doing it before Red Hat made me the job offer, and I said yes 6 years ago. I want to talk about what's wrong with security today, and I'm gonna be a lot broader than Matt and John. You guys went deep into Log4j and deep into SolarWinds, and that was good stuff. I'm going to be a lot broader. I'm not going to go deep into anything. What's wrong with security today, and then what's the cure? You should all be suspicious. Some bald guy from Minnesota is going to offer the magic cure for everything. Yeah, right. But just bear with me. And then the the very next thing after I give you the cure is you're going to say, Greg, you lost your mind. You're nuts. So then I'm going to defend myself a little bit, and then I have a call to action. Does that work? You can say yes again.
Sounds good.
Sure.
Okay. All right. We'll keep everybody lively. If you go to Google and you search for Fortune 500 data breach, you'll every single company in the whole world is a victim. Everybody's a victim. I threw some logos on here. I forgot all about Kaseya till you guys mentioned it, so I swapped out eBay and put Kaseya in there because Kaseya was recent. I could put a bazillion logos in here, and they all have stories. They're all unique. Like Uber. Somebody attacked Uber and got their customer list, and then Uber paid the attackers, I think it was $100,000 to keep quiet. How's that for making your attacker a partner? Equifax, we all know what happened with Equifax, and the Marriott hotels lost 1 billion or 2 billion records or something like that. Yahoo lost a bunch. We talked about SolarWinds. Colonial Pipeline, we couldn't deliver fuel to the whole eastern United States for like 2 weeks because of a ransomware attack. And the Microsoft Exchange, that was the worst one of all because it hit my Exchange server, and I didn't fix it fast enough, and some bad guys got inside of it, and they sent emails to radio stations claiming to come from me. So I apologize to everybody who was in my contact list a few months ago, because you're just going to keep getting spam in my name. So I'll teach everybody how to look at email headers. And Capital One had a problem. Every single one of these had problems. They're all unique. This will blow your mind. You guys mentioned an attack every month. There's like a new one every month. It's way more often than that. I like this magazine called IT Governance. It's a British magazine, but every month they tally up the attacks they found out about that made the news. I am not going to go into details of all this. Don't get shocked. I want to show you the volume that we're dealing with here. So let's just fly through a bunch of these. Here's a few attacks, and here's a few more, and here's some more, and here's some more. And here's some more. These are ransomware. Now here's some ransomware attacks. This is all in January. And here's some more. And these are the ones that made the news, and some more. And then some data breaches. Here's a few, and a few more, and some financial stuff that was broken, and some malicious insider stuff, and a couple pieces that made the news. I want to talk about this one, this Missouri Reporter one, this one right here. That one caught my eye. It caught my eye a long time ago, and then it caught my eye again when I put these together. Josh Renaud is a reporter for the St. Louis Post-Dispatch, and he found a vulnerability. If you went to this Missouri website that looked at teachers, and you did view source, any website, view source. So you view the HTML source, and the social security numbers were just there in clear text, right there. To view source, there's everybody's social security numbers. So Renaud did the right thing. He reported it to the school district. The school district fixed the problem, and then they published it. They published his work in the paper. What do you think his reward was? Missouri Governor Parsons threatened to prosecute him. How's that for responsible disclosure? I have a reason for sharing that story. There was a whole big, huge investigation, and everybody said Renaud did the right thing, and he got cleared. But he went through months of no end of grief for that, for his trouble, and that's part of the problem. Anyway, January 2022. The only thing special about January 2022 is it's the last full month that we've had. And if we were doing this like on March 3rd or 4th or 5th, something like that, then I'd have numbers from February. But 95 attacks over 31 days in January. The arithmetic is pretty easy. It's a little bit more than 3 data leakage incidents every single day in January. It's not once a month. It's on average in January 3 times a day. And those are just the ones that made the news. There's plenty more that we haven't heard about. I don't know how to make the case any better that cybersecurity is a big deal, and we don't as a society, we don't talk about it enough. We don't even though it's in the news all the time, and you see stories about the Russians are going to launch cyber attacks. The public doesn't have a clue about what any of this stuff means. We got to fix that. Okay, what all these attacks have in common? The biggie is we don't know what went wrong and what they did to fix it. I mean, think about that. Equifax is an exception. Equifax, we know what went wrong and what they did to fix it. And it took a congressional investigation. Did anybody see when the former CEO of Equifax was sweating in front of a congressional panel answering questions? They didn't really know what questions to ask, but he stood there and he took it. It took an act of Congress to investigate what happened with Equifax. So because 150 million of our social security numbers is now in the public domain. Let that sink in for a minute. It took an act of Congress to investigate what went wrong. What's wrong with that picture? And if you want the report, there's a link to the report. The SANS Institute has details about the report. There's a whole bunch of management failures that led to the one guy who was in charge of patching, leaving that one Apache Struts server open. A whole bunch of management failures. Imagine that. I also want to, you guys brought up supply chain attacks. I want to talk about a couple of them. The first one I want to talk about is, remember NotPetya, another one that the Russians foisted on the world. This is one of the early Ukrainian supply chain attacks. And there was, they hammered Ukraine. This hammered a lot of Ukrainian companies hard. It shut a lot of Ukrainian companies down, because their permission models weren't right, and they didn't segment their networks right, and the companies made a bunch of mistakes. But this one was an American company named Maersk, M-A-E-R-S-K. Maersk controls something like somewhere between 20 and 30% of all shipments of everything around the world. If you want to put something on the ship and move it around the world, Maersk is probably the company that does that. So Maersk had a PC sitting in Ukraine, and this PC had a copy of this software on it that was polluted, and the software polluted that PC. The PC was inside Maersk's network. Eventually, all their domain controllers died. All their domain controllers around the whole world, they all went kapoof, and that shut Maersk down because nobody could log in, except for one domain controller. And I forget which country in Africa that happened to be offline at the time. And so the Maersk guys in London got on an airplane and they flew to Africa. They picked up this hard drive. They brought it back to London, and that's how they recovered. It's a great story. And I've got a link to it right here right. Well, look what I did. That's what happens when you do live. Anyway, it's right. It's a link right there. By the way, too, if you want this PowerPoint, I'm gonna put it on my website, and I'll email Michael about it, and he can forward it out to you, so you can just grab the PowerPoint, so you can look at all the links firsthand.
Thanks. We post everything for our chapter members on our website, and we'll make the information available to them. Can you just go into presentation mode or slide viewer so it's a little bit bigger for us?
Oh yeah, sorry. Was it teeny tiny? Sorry.
No, it's not that small, but on the.
All right, here. Yeah, no big deal. Slideshow from current slide. Better?
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Okay. Thanks. All right. So you have, the public doesn't, they're going to ask you what's a supply chain attack, and I came up with a way to explain it such that everybody's mom can understand it. So here's how you explain supply chain attacks to the public. So imagine a movie, imagine a spy movie. And so the good guys are sitting around a table and they're plotting, how are we going to save the world? What are we going to do to rescue the world? Okay, that's your vision. Put that vision in your head. Now the next vision put in your head, there's a bad guy somewhere listening in. The room is bugged and a bad guy is listening. Well, that's kind of like how cyber attacks are, right? I mean, we do evil stuff, but we get inside the network and we find out stuff, and then we make our move. So there's a bad guy listening. It's expensive and it's time consuming to recon a network and find the vulnerability and plant your evil software to do your deeds. It's expensive and time consuming, right? How would you bug every good guy room around the whole world? How would you do the labor one time and get in everywhere all the time? That's what supply chains do. Well, here's how you do it. How would you plant bugs in every good guy room in the world? The answer is take over the light bulb factory. You plant bugs in everybody's light bulbs, and now you own every room in the whole world. Does that make sense? It's okay to participate. Or not. In 2017, this company called ME Docs was a Ukrainian accounting company. That was the NotPetya light bulb factory. Somebody the Russians got inside this company. They planted evil software inside this company. Everybody in Ukraine downloaded a copy. Now the Russians owned all these companies all across Ukraine. That's a supply chain attack. Does that make sense?
Yep.
All right, cool.
I have a question, excuse me. This means there's no like a literary bulb. This software about light bulb factory.
Think of the light bulb as just a metaphor.
Ah, okay.
The light bulb is a metaphor. It's not, don't think about literal light bulbs. It's just a metaphor. Most people in the world don't do technology for a living. And so if you start to tell them about technology stuff, if you say the word protocol in a sentence, protocol, 1002, about 2 seconds maybe. By the time, if you say protocol, when you say the pr part, they've got eye contact and they're right there with you. By the time you get done with the word protocol, their body is turned sideways and they're trying to escape the room. I've seen it. I've seen it happen. You can't say technology words to the public. So you find ways to explain this stuff that doesn't use technology words, and then they'll listen to you. So I use this light bulb metaphor to explain supply chain attacks. Does that work?
Yes, thank you, because I'm from Ukraine and I'm translate literary light bulb.
Oh. Thank you for that question. And our prayers are with you and your family and any friends that you have over there too. I have friends in Ukraine, and I've been glued to Twitter and CNN, just watching what's going on and praying.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you for hanging out with us. Solar winds, we talked that you guys went deep into solar winds, so there's no sense rehashing that. Just, it was the big one. It was a big supply chain attack. The solar winds manages some of the biggest networks in the whole world. And the Russians got inside solar winds, polluted solar wind software. Everybody downloaded it. So now the Russians are inside all these networks inside the world. That's a big deal. Okay, so what's the cure for all this stuff? Do you like my Doc Brown picture? What's the I have a counterintuitive proposal, and this is the part where you're going to question my sanity at first. So I'll ask you that you bear with me, because I'm going to defend myself, and I think I'll defend myself well. But right at first, you're going to think I'm crazy. That's me. This bird out here on the other side of the wire. That's me. Here's the solution. Open everything up. Tell the whole world what you do for security. Tell the world about your topology and your permission models and what you respond when there's an incident, how you're going to respond to it. Do public postmortems. Every time there's an incident, do postmortems in public, wide open to the world. If you have meetings, maybe even live stream the meetings. Write articles and document what happened and post those articles on your website. Present this stuff at conferences. Present what went wrong, what you did to fix it. Present all that stuff to conferences and expect everybody else to do the same. And subject everything you do to this gauntlet of peer review, and then and peer review other people and what they do too. And you game out all your scenarios with yourself and other organizations. I promise you will be embarrassed. I know the feeling well. But would you rather be embarrassed or would you rather be penetrated? So demand openness from your suppliers and provide it to your stakeholders. That's the cure. That's the way you win. And now this is, I'm gonna give you more. Have I lost my mind? That's me with the jumper cables. It's just a picture. They weren't connected to anything on the other end. Okay, but a SolarWinds blogger, we're going to pick on SolarWinds a little bit. A SolarWinds blogger thinks I've lost my mind. He wrote this blog post, and this is what he said. He said, open source security becomes a major issue. Anyone can be hacked. However, the risk is far less when it comes to proprietary software. Due to the nature of open source software allowing anyone to update the code, the risk of download malicious code is much higher. And yes, he posted that before the SolarWinds meltdown. I have a bunch of PG-13 words about that, but let's just call it hogwash. He's wrong, and history proved him wrong. But we did have an issue in the open source world with bogus commits. And that was right here in my neighborhood. The guys from Arctic Wolf probably heard about this too. There was the University of Minnesota ran some grad students did a paper about a tactic they called hypocrite commits. And the idea was go into the kernel code, go into the Linux kernel, and find some areas where you could make bad patches, and then submit the bad patches and see what happens. And so they did that. They submitted the bad patches. Some of the stuff got caught, and then they wrote their paper about it. And their premise was the software is filled with areas where a few changes in the code could make things happen really, really, really bad. So they wrote their paper, and then they did it again. And that started a whole big brouhaha because they wasted a whole bunch of people's times, and a whole bunch of people got mad. And the University of Minnesota, long story short, destroyed its reputation for trust in the open source community. They made a big deal out of it, and I think they're earning their reputation back. The Verge interviewed me about this whole thing, and I gave my opinion, which was I have a reputation for being blunt. And so some knucklehead wrote me an obscenity-filled email, and there's a copy of it. Bottom line, the system worked. The people tested the system, and there's a whole big brouhaha about it, but the open source system worked. We all know that people make mistakes, and we've seen the mistakes. We lived through Heartbleed, and we lived through Log4j, and we lived through a bunch of the others. But we also fix this stuff. Open is good. That's all I'll say there. This controversy about embracing open, you're going to like this history lesson. It goes back to at least 1853, and that's not a typo. That's somewhere around almost 170 years old. So there was a guy named Alfred Charles Hobbs, and he was this master locksmith with mechanical locks. And he went to London, I think it was 1851 or 1852, and there are these London lock builders, and they built what they claimed was an unpickable lock. Does this sound familiar? And Hobbs went to London and he picked their locks and he embarrassed everybody and he raised a whole lot of ruckus. And then he helped edit this book that had this eye-catching title, Rudimentary Treatise on the Construction of Locks. And here is what he said at the bottom of page 2 and the top of page 3. Don't try to read that. I have this a little bit better. Don't try to read that either right now on the slide. Just read this, the part I put in yellow. If a lock, let it have been made in whatever country or by whatever maker, is not so inviolable as it has hitherto to have been deemed to be. Surely it is in the interest of honest persons to know this fact, because the dishonest are tolerably certain to be the first to apply the knowledge practically, and the spread of the knowledge is necessary to give fair play to those who might suffer by ignorance. We've changed language quite a bit since 1853, and I'm going to give you what he said in 21st century language. Well, I'll just do it right now. Rogues are very keen in their profession and know already much more than we can teach them respecting the several kinds of roguery. I like that. Here it is in 21st century language. Bad guys spend all day long probing good guys. You mentioned speed. Matt and John, you mentioned speed. When you found Log4j, the very next day there was exploits all over the place, right? And a few hours later there were more exploits after that. How do bad guys move so fast? How does that work? Well, they talk to each other. They spend all day probing good guys, and they spend all night collaborating with each other to improve tomorrow's probes. I've got some evidence. I'm going to show you about that in a minute. Bad guys already know as much about our internal networks as we do because they study it all day and all night. That's what they do. But good guys, we isolate ourselves behind this wall of secrecy, and that's why we keep making the same mistakes over and over and over and over and over again. You level the playing field by collaborating, by opening up, embracing open. That's how we level the playing field. This is a website called deep.web. And how do bad guys win? They collaborate. That's true. Deep.web was a directory run by volunteers. Anything illegal you wanted to find, go to deep.web and find it. Any evil websites on the other side of inside of a Tor network, or if you wanted to buy illegal drugs, or you wanted to learn how to do exploits, or you wanted to learn how to steal credit card numbers, go here, prove yourself, set up an account, and look up what you want to look up. Cool, right? If you're a bad guy, score one for the good guys. The law enforcement agencies around the world collaborated, and they eventually shut this website down. You can do that. If you're law enforcement, you can take over the DNS, and so then the DNS points to your website. And that's what happened in 2019. There's a great Wired article about it, and here's a link to it. So score one for the good guys, right? But it's like whack-a-mole. The bad guys don't give up easily. Now I can go to deeponionweb.com and get it, the Onion browser, deeponionweb.com. I can go to deeponionweb.com and find pretty much the same thing. Any hacking advice or how to steal stuff or illegal drugs. Go to deeponionweb.com and just look around. It's just right there. So bad guys collaborate. There's another piece of this. If you're a CISSP candidate, I'll bet you there's going to be a bazillion questions about this zero trust architecture on your test. So it would be good to learn this stuff. And here I have a link, special publication 800-207. It's a NIST, it's a standard. It's a government standard. There's 6 assumptions that the zero trust architecture rests on, and here they are. And the idea is you can't trust your devices, and you can't trust the software, and you have to assume that something is bad until they prove that they're good. That's the idea, and it's helpful. It's a theoretical architecture, and it's helpful. Did anybody do CISSP tests like in an earlier generation? There was stuff called the BIBA model where you could around trust where you could write up and read down, and there's all kinds of hypothetical rules about that. Hypothetical rules are good because they help us learn the concepts, but the real world rarely follows theoretical architectures, and burn that into your brain. The real world rarely follows the theoretical architectures. And what there will never be a technology defense against supply chain attacks. It won't happen. Somehow, some way, and Matt and John mentioned it too. You have to trust somebody. You have to trust somebody. The only defense, the single one and only defense, is make suppliers earn your trust. And suppliers earn your trust by embracing open. Well, that's all nice and hypothetical and everything. How do they embrace open? Well, if you're a consumer, maybe what you want to do is get together with a bunch of other consumers and put some meat behind into that bone of what about what does that mean to embrace open? How are you guys going to prove to me that your stuff is good? And the government's doing some of that with SolarWinds now. SolarWinds, if you want us to stay your customers, you're going to have to prove that your stuff is good to us. And we should embrace that for everything, for every supplier, for every piece of software, for everything. There is no technology that's going to do it for us. It's good old-fashioned human judgment. There's no substitute for good old-fashioned human judgment. Okay, call to action. What are we going to do? Shout it from the rooftops. That's what we're going to do. We're going to shout from the rooftops, embrace open. This is my youngest grandson, Elijah, and I persuaded him to climb up on the roof the other day before it snowed with a megaphone and pose for me. So shout it. Oh, what I want you to do, take away from this, shout this from the rooftops. If you want to fix the security problems in the world, embrace open, share it. And I've got a people that say security is there's a whole bunch of stuff to security, and there really is. I'm going to give you a six word really dumb rhyme. Care and share to be prepared. Care enough about this stuff to actually invest, and share everything you learn and expect everyone else to share what they learn. But wait a minute. I'm just a sysadmin. Who's going to listen to me, right? No one's going to listen to me. I'm just me. So what do we do about that? Well, listen to guys like Warren Buffett. Warren Buffett said, and this is in 2017, I don't know that much about cyber, but I do think that's the #1 problem with mankind. And even today, it's a huge problem. You know, I told you about that 0 day with the Apple phone. That a reporter, Khashoggi, with the reporter with the Washington Post, who was a Saudi Arabian citizen, he's dead because of these 0 days. And there's ransomware attacks on hospitals where patients couldn't go to hospitals, and so they had to go to other hospitals, and some of them died. So there really is some life and death to this stuff. It's not just credit cards and money. But you know what? Another person to listen to, and I saw this just a couple weeks ago, Delta Airlines CISO, Chief Information Security Officer Debbie Wheeler. And here's the link, the CSO online article where she said this. We have to get to the point where security can't be seen as a competitive advantage. It can't be what we use to succeed against a competitor. Security has to be one of those areas where we come together to share best practices. Some of those might not be for everyone, but the sharing will serve us all and help us all to be stronger, and that's what we need. Couldn't have said it better myself. So I like what she had to say. So here's where I take my own medicine. Karen, share to be prepared. I'm an author. I write books. I work for this. I work for Red Hat during the day, and I help support big telco companies. And at night, I work on my novels, and my novels have a cybersecurity twist. So I'll throw in a book plug at the end about where to find my books. And they're really, you'll like Jerry Barkley. He's a bald-headed IT guy who lives in Eagan, Minnesota, and right near my house. That's my grandson Zeke. This is my buddy Igor, and Igor is Ukrainian. I met Igor in 2001 in Uzhhorod, Ukraine, right on the western border, right next to Slovakia. And I met him. He was 22 years old then. We've stayed in touch this whole time. And in 2017, Igor offered. He said, "May I hack your website?" And I said, "Sure, Igor. Have a ball. Have a ball. Do whatever. You know, you're not going to get into my website because you know I do security for a living and I'm really, really, really smart. So you're not going to get into my website. So take your best shot." It took him about a half hour, and he got me good. And this is English is not Igor's native language, and so he gave me a bunch of grief here. Let's I think I have this on the next slide. Yeah. Here's where he gave me a bunch of grief. I'd left a directory wide open to directory searches. So Greg, man, why? Come on. I think that's only the beginning. No, Greg, what's wrong with you? And I was embarrassed. I was mad. I was mad at Igor. I was just mad. How could he find something wrong with me? You know, I do security for a living. How can he find something wrong with me, right? So I was mad. All the emotions that you go through. I went through the emotions on a small scale. I was mad, and then I denied it. I don't have time to fix this stuff. Maybe I'll just bury it. And then I tossed and turned about it, and finally I fixed it. And it turned out to just be it was a wrong default setting in a configuration file, the httpd.conf. Options indexes follow options indexes, and indexes is what the problem was. You can't, if you say options indexes, that means you can index the directory. Well, that's bad. If you can go to the website, index the directory, you can recon it, and you can figure out ways to pollute it. So I got rid of indexes and I fixed it. Igor did me a huge favor, and I went through all this trouble. By the way, I talked to Igor. We traded some messages about 5 days ago, and he is scared and he's worried. And I pray that he's okay. He's on the west side of Ukraine. I pray that he's okay. He's no, don't get into politics now. Here's our wall of shame again. And oh yeah, Ashley Madison. Your whole business model is cheating, is keeping data for cheating spouses, and you wonder that you got penetrated. Hello. If organizations like these embraced open, what good stuff would happen? You think Equifax would have saved like maybe $1 billion? It cost Equifax $1 billion in remediation costs for that attack. And Uber still has it. I won't use Uber. Even now there's all new management. I still won't use Uber. It cost them more than $100,000 in cash when they teamed up with their attacker. And then ransomware. Look at some of the press conferences from Atlanta, from the Atlanta ransomware attack. The politicians spent hours not telling us anything. I watched some of them. I yelled at the monitor. Tell me stuff. And SolarWinds might not have compromised pretty much every important network in the whole world. And fuel deliveries might not have been disrupted. So put your organization here too. If you embrace open, what bad stuff can you avoid? So here's the last slide. I hold in my hand the last slide. The crowd cheers. How do you get a hold of me? My website, www.dgregscott.com, and there's 2 books. There's 2 novels, and Virus Bomb and Bullseye Breach. Way back in 2014, I got frustrated because I would tell people security stuff, and their eyes would glaze over. You know, I mentioned that protocol story a little while ago, and that really did happen. I said the word protocol, and by the time I got done with the word protocol, the other person was sideways and trying to escape because the technology words are just, it's like throwing knives at people. And so I decided, let's try to use fiction to present truth better than the news. So Bullseye Breach is a novel about a retailer named Bullseye Stores with headquarters in Minneapolis, and Bullseye Stores loses 40 million customer credit card numbers to a group of overseas attackers. And Jerry Barkley and a ragtag group here in the Twin Cities finds a way to fight back. And then Virus Bomb, Jerry Barkley finds a few PCs that are virus infested, which is not a big deal. We find that all the time. But this one is interacting with a Tor entrance node somehow, and that gets his suspicions up. And it's also interacting with a transportation company, and that really gets his suspicions up. What does a computer inside of a small marketing company have to do with a trucking company? So he digs and digs and digs, and the more he digs, the more people think he's crazy, until he uncovers this biological attack that a hostile power is trying to foist on the U.S. And then, well, read the story. You'll love it. And Jerry Barkley's got kind of an attitude too. And so there's my website, dgregscott.com, and you can email me at infrasupport.com or dgregscott.com. There are 2 names that go to the same place, and LinkedIn and YouTube, and that's how to find me. So thanks for putting up with me, and let's do questions. I'll turn the screen share off. I think I will. Right here. Stop sharing. Wait, stop sharing right there. Okay. Okay. And I think, did I get 550?
So I'll bite.
Thanks.
So it seems almost, I mean, radical that your expectations are that a business entity, let's use that as an example, would share their network topology and invite anybody to try to, just like you did with your buddy Igor, invite people to leverage that information and try to get in there and, get the keys to the castle or whatever it might be. So
I'm not suggesting we invite attacks. Igor offered and I took him up on it, but
Right.
I am suggesting that it is radical. You're right. It is radical. And I am suggesting that we do lots of sharing. And here's the classic response to the question. How's it going doing it the way we're doing it now? maybe we want to think about doing things different. Unless we enjoy all the penetrations that we see all the time.
Right. It's certainly, thought provoking. It's just not the normal train of thought that one would take.
It's not. It's about as radical as it gets. It is. And it's counterintuitive. If Alfred Charles Hobbs were alive today, he would be an internet security researcher. He'd probably be pitching Embrace Open way better than me. And so, and yeah, when you go back to your jobs and you pitch Embrace Open, if you have, and it's going to take some guts, maybe pitch it to your manager quietly first and get some support, but use this presentation as ammo to back you up. Or you could bring in, I'll bring in some bald guy stranger too. Now, listen, just buy a couple books from this guy. That's all you got to do, and he'll come talk to you.
Is that the title of your next book, Embrace Open?
No, I don't know what the title's going to. I haven't titled it yet. The next book is going to have human traffickers, and I don't know what it's going to be titled yet. Maybe business school. I don't know yet. It's not far enough along. Now, and Igor is IHOR, but in Ukrainian the H sound what looks like an American H makes a G sound. Yes, there you go. Yep. And yeah, English is not Igor's native language, but he's one of the smartest people around. And he gave me a load of grief about what he found. How could you make such a rookie dumb mistake, Greg? He was right.
Have you considered the issue of open sourcing everything and how certain shareholders might take umbrance to that because the value of the stock fell precipitously, and then start suing the corporation for their losses?
I've considered it. Now remember that I work for a company that open sources everything, and Red Hat's doing pretty well in the marketplace. And there's a lot of companies that hold everything proprietary and close to the vest and don't share. And some of them do well, some of them don't. Anytime you try something new, there's a risk that somebody will get mad, and there's a risk that it might not work right. But I believe that by collaborating properly, you can be stronger than any single one person individually. And also the counter to your question is, have you considered what happens by not opening up? And so somebody exploits a vulnerability that you didn't find because you're the only set of eyeballs on it. So somebody exploits a vulnerability that you didn't find, and now you're vulnerable to lawsuits and all those bad things. And there's risk getting up out of bed and walking across the street. So I like open wins. There's a book called The Great Game of Business by Jack Stack, and this is not about open source technology. It's about open in general. He had a group that was deep into debt. They bought the Springfield Engine Remanufacturing Company. It was a I think it was Harvester. Harvester threw this company away because it was losing money, and the morale was terrible, and the factory was dirty, and it was going to go bankrupt. And through a weird series of events, Jack Stack ended up owning this company. And the only way they were going to succeed is if everybody pulled together as a team and everybody knew what was going on, from the janitor all the way up to the CEO. Everybody knew where the finances were and what was happening when and what the plan was. Everybody had to be on board. And so he started getting everybody on board, and little by little by little, the quality went up, morale went up, all the stuff you want to happen in a company that all worked out nicely. There's another book called The Open Organization by Jim Whitehurst. And that's a more modern twist on it from Red Hat's point of view. If you collaborate and develop teams and the teams learn to trust one another, you can do a whole lot more than just one single individual.
I have a question and maybe a question comment kind of thing.
Sure.
When you think about open source, there's been some significant vulnerabilities out there. JBoss, Tomcat, Postgres, lots and lots. But when you analyze the lag time to get some of these vulnerabilities closed, some of them are pretty long in the CVE database. So how do you compare lag times of, closed source versus open source lag time to close vulnerabilities, and how do businesses weigh that into their risk management process?
I don't have numbers and statistics in my head, but I will tell you that and we've seen it, you've seen it. Researchers are studying this stuff all the time, and I'm not suggesting to be stupid here, by the way. There are rules for responsible disclosure for vulnerabilities. If you find a vulnerability and it's a really, really bad one, and you publish it to the whole world right away before you tell the vendor, well, you got to get your hand slapped. Maybe you got to get your head smacked with a 2x4. That's just not cool to do that. I'm not suggesting to be stupid. I'm suggesting that we collaborate. If you look at the open source world versus the proprietary world, which sets of bugs get fixed faster? I don't know the answer. I don't know who's get fixed. Depending on who you talk to, everybody will say their bugs get fixed faster. All I'm saying is let's collaborate. Let's collaborate for everybody's common good. Let's level the playing field, because bad guys are already collaborating. Just look at that Deep Onion web and some of the other forums that are out there. Every night there's some rookie somewhere saying, how do I learn how to steal credit cards, and somebody else is taking them under their wing and teaching them. Happens all the time. So we should do that same thing. Also, by opening this up, we elevate the security practice from people with white lab coats that nobody understands what we do. We elevate that security practice to something that's respectable and honorable and everybody cares about. So I cannot be the only one who looked at somebody and said a technology word and watched their eyes glaze over. I cannot be the only one here that's had that experience. I see a smile. You've all lived, everybody here has lived it, right? Yeah. So embrace open, and then maybe you can beat that back. And also, throw in a book plug. Use entertaining fiction to help tell truth, to help spread truth better than the news. So use entertaining fiction for that too.
It sounds like it's almost like embrace open, but be concerned who you're opening up with and make sure they're trusted partners and others, not don't be stupid, to your point.
Well, yeah. If you publish your network topology in any forum anywhere, the bad guys are going to see it. but don't assume. We assume that because we're keeping things secret, bad guys don't know about it. You want to know about you want to know you want a great example of fiction, secret fiction, social security numbers. We all grew up with this. Your social security number is yours. It's private. Don't tell anybody your social security number because bad things can happen to you. Well, unless you want to buy a house. Well, unless you want to buy a car, or unless you want to get a job, unless you want to borrow money for anything, unless you want to do anything in society. But other than that, don't tell anybody your social security number because it's a secret. Except it's not a secret. Your social security number is available for sale in any number of underground forums. So how much of a secret is it anyway? But we still act as if it's a secret. We pretend that it's a secret, but it's not really a secret. That's my youngest grandson, Zeke. Say hi, Zeke.
Hi.
So, let's not assume that our secrets really are secrets, because they most likely are not. Go back to that zero trust model. Don't assume that your secrets are secrets. So as long as they're not secrets, you may as well just share it with the whole world and get some feedback on it, on how to make it better. You want to know what else is not secret? Security or encryption algorithms. I can pick up a book and I can study how RSA works, and I can burn that algorithm into my brain, right? What's secret are the encryption keys, which are supposed to be secrets. And I'm not suggesting we share encryption keys, but RSA is strong because everybody can look at it and try to break it, and so that's how we make it stronger. Do you think if those encryption algorithms were secret and there was some deep, dark piece of software that came from somebody we didn't know who they were, how much would you trust it? So open is good.
All right. Any final questions?
Sounds like Blade Runner. Wicked is good.
No, I got that. Whatever is good. I got that language from the St. Paul Saints, from Vec, Mike Vec, who was the owner of the St. Paul Saints, and his big saying was "fun is good," and so I embrace that. So open is good. Whatever is good. It sums up. It's an easy way to sum up what you want to say.
All right, let me just a couple of reminders, quick. The next two meetings, for those of you who might have joined late, March 31st, data privacy, and April 21st, more of an HR slant with Lisa Garber and Scott Olson, two other authors besides Greg. So I want to mention that for the members that the slides will be available and the recording on our website by logging into my page and looking at the communities. We'll get that out over the next few days. That'll include Greg's contact information. And there was one other thing that's kind of just popped out of my mind. So just keep those dates open. And oh yeah, if anybody is an ISC2 cert holder and we don't have your number and you want us to submit CPEs for you, just shoot them over to me and we'll make sure that you're included in our submission.
Cool.
So that said, just want to thank everybody again. Greg, thank you very much. I don't know if Jonathan's still on. I know Matt dropped off, but thanks everybody.
Thanks for having me.
Get back to your evening.
Hey Thomas, one final comment, just quick. You wanted me to share Igor's contact, and I'll share it with you privately. Igor is inside Ukraine right now. So
understood. I understand that.
Let's wait a little while on that.
Yeah. I just thought it was really pretty cool. I mean, that's an ethical hacker.
Yeah, he's a good guy, and and those were all Facebook messages.
Very good. Very good. Thank you.
Sure.
All right, Greg. Look forward. Maybe you can come back and give us an update later on in the year on your progress in your next book.
Yeah, thanks. We'll do information warfare next time.
Oh, yeah, it sounds like a great topic.
Okay, thanks. Thanks
All
for
right.
having me. I enjoyed it. Thank you very
Thank
much.
you very much. Stay warm in Minnesota.
Okay. All right. See you
Thank
guys
you.
later.
Thanks, everybody.
All right. Bye, guys.